about his career in the United States Air Force and his years of work with the Veterans History Project. I'm Terry DeMay, and I'll be interviewing Ed on behalf of the Conejo Valley Chapter, National Society Daughters of the American Revolution, and the Aquila Chase Chapter, National Society Colonial Days 17th Century, for the Veterans History Project of the Library of Congress. Ed is usually my partner and videographer for these interviews. Today, his wife Lucky, also from Advana Videography, will be filming the interview. This is Ed's story. Good morning, Ed.
Good morning, dear.
For the record, please introduce yourself and tell us when you served and in which branch of the service.
My birth name is Edward Earl Hubenthal. That was changed later in my life, and we'll talk about that later. I served in the U.S. Air Force, a command called Security Service at the time.
Thank you. And where and when were you born?
I was born December 22nd, 1939, 11:18 p.m., according to my birth certificate, at the Florence Crittenden Home for Unwed Mothers in Denver, Colorado. My mother was 15 at the time. Her first marriage was to a country boy, I guess. Nobody knows who he is, except my aunt has a picture of us, the family, and this fellow was there. And she called him Tully, which is all I know about that. That marriage didn't last very long. So she went back on the road and wound up marrying a truck driver who owned a company, trucking company in Decatur, Illinois, and that's why we wound up in Decatur, Illinois. And then after that marriage didn't work out, she married another fellow who was living in Decatur, who was also a truck driver. And then we lived in several different places there in Decatur for a while, and then apparently they bought a piece of property outside of Decatur, and we moved out there and lived out there for, I don't know, a couple of years maybe, until that marriage didn't work out. So in between these, when she was off trying to get her life together, I wound up living with some friends of hers, the Barretts, Arthur and Eva Barrett. And then again, they were nice people, farmers basically, and I was blessed because of that. Could have been in much worse situations, but I never experienced any situation of abuse or, other than I'm sure I came out of that with a feeling of abandonment, just because of the situation with my mother. And I think that's been part of my temperament ever since, but not too hard to figure out.
Where did you grow up?
Grew up mostly in central Illinois, around a little town called Decatur, Illinois, until I was around 12, and then my mother and I moved back to Denver, Colorado, where I was born. And lived there for about 3 or 4 years.
Oh, we skipped some things.
Yeah.
How about 1951? Moved back to Denver and Baker Junior High School?
Yeah, well, when we moved to Denver, and that was 51 or 52, I guess, I wound up living kind of in central Denver. We were kind of a gypsy bunch, and so we lived in a lot of different places in Denver. And I wound up going to a Baker Junior High School in West Denver, and it was a 2-year school. And then I went to West Denver High School for 9th, 10th, and 11th grade.
And when did you become interested in music?
At Baker Junior High School. They had music in those days, and they actually had classes, and they had instruments that they let you use. So I wound up learning to play clarinet, and did pretty well with that. Music seemed to come pretty easy for me, and so I actually won 2 state blue ribbons in 2 years of state contests in Denver. And then when I was in high school, I was the first chair clarinet in the high school orchestra, and my music teacher encouraged me to learn to play the baritone sax and a bassoon.
And he was pretty important in your life, wasn't he?
He was a very important guy, yeah. And music was kind of the focus at that point. I didn't really have much interest in anything else, but the music, I wanted to learn more music, and I did what I could. But the reason he's important is kind of a odd story. In my sophomore year, it was pretty clear that my mother was struggling financially. She didn't have any education really. She was probably got to 8th grade if she was lucky. And she'd had a pretty rough life, and so she usually worked in restaurants and bars. And she contracted hepatitis. I'm not sure which one, but she contracted hepatitis and passed away. Well, a little before that, I saw that financially, there was problems, so I decided to quit school and get a job. And in the process of quitting school, you had to go around and have every teacher sign you out. So I did. And the music teacher, Dr. Gene Eland, later Dr. Gene Eland, took me aside and probably spent at least an hour trying to talk me out of quitting school. But I was a stubborn kid. He said at one point, well, look, I've got to go to a very quick teacher's meeting, and don't leave. I still want to talk to you a little bit. So I waited. He came back. We finished up, and I left. And there's probably 7 or 8 different ways you can leave this building. The West Denver High School is a big building, big school. And so I got out, went out the door, and a couple minutes later, another teacher, Larry Lynch, hollered at me and asked me if I wanted to ride. And I was going a little way, so I said, sure. Yeah. And I had Mr. Lynch in a biology class, I think, in my freshman year. So I knew him, and he knew me. And so at any rate, we chatted about, he was curious about my situation and all that. So when he dropped me off, he made an offer, and he said, if you want to finish high school, call me and we can work out things so that you can live with my family and I till you finish high school. And I was, of course, kind of, whoa, where'd that come from? But he knew things that I didn't know he knew. So I thanked him, and he dropped me off, and we went our separate ways. So probably not much more than 2 weeks later, I had gotten a job at Western Union in Denver, and I was working downtown out of the main office, and the supervisor called me in and said, we just got a call. You need to go to this restaurant where your mother has been working. And so, okay. So I hopped the bus and got down there, and they told me when I got there that, well, she was taken to county medical, county something. And so I went back and wound up at the hospital, county medical hospital, and actually found her in the hospital. And it was a rather surreal experience because I don't remember seeing anybody or having anybody question me where I was going or what I was doing the whole time I was there. But I wound up in a big open room where they had a lot of gurneys sitting around. Some of them had screens around them, all that. And I found my mother, behind one of these screened out off areas. And something about what I saw just left me convinced that she had died. And there wasn't anybody around to ask. There wasn't any, it was just weird. And this wasn't like in the middle of the night. This was the middle of the afternoon. So anyway, I left, and that was kind of the end of it, in my mind. And we were living at that time in an apartment with a friend of hers, a lady and her two sons. And so I just went back to the apartment, and I guess it was a week later or so that my aunt arranged for the funeral, and she lived in Littleton. Her name was Arlette. And so I remember going to the memorial, and then out to the cemetery. Well, the cemetery was an open field, just a flat out open field. It was an old wheat field, you could tell. There was still stubble in the ground, but apparently it was a brand new cemetery, and she was apparently the first person to be buried in it. And so we just had this little roadside ceremony while she was buried, and then after that we went back to my aunt's house. And after, I don't know, a while, everybody's kind of doing whatever they did. My uncle, who had been estranged from the family, his name was Albert, who surprised everybody by showing up for the funeral. He lived in Iowa, I think, at the time. Took me aside and just asked me, what do you think you want to do? How do you think you're going to do? And so I said, well, probably military. Somebody can sign me in, and I can probably do the military thing. And otherwise, I've got a job, I think, at Western Union, so I could go back to that. And then there was this guy from school who said if I wanted to finish high school, I could live with him. And he says, well, can you get a hold of him? And I said, probably. So I went to the Yellow Pages. There were Yellow Pages in those days, and looked up his number and called and talked to his wife, Margaret. Told her who I was and what my situation was and why I was calling. She said, oh, I remember. So she said, I'll call Larry and let him know. He's working his second job, as chemistry teachers tend to do, I guess. And that evening he came out, and with all my worldly possessions, I went home with Mr. Lynch and became part of that family. And the rest, as they say, is history. So it was quite an amazing change in my life, because prior to that, there wasn't really family. I grew up with decent people, and I never went without a meal. Always slept in a safe and comfortable place. So it's kind of amazing to me looking back on that for that 15 years while my mother was struggling to find a way to make a life for herself. And she went through 3 marriages, and I guess finally said, can't do that. So she moved back to Denver, and we went on from there.
It's okay.
Yeah.
So in 1957, Larry Lynch went to Stanford on a
In
scholarship?
1956, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, all these things happened when I was in my sophomore year, when I was 16. And that summer, the summer after I joined the family, he went to some kind of a program at Stanford in California. So we drove to California, and it was like driving to a foreign country to me. So I got to see some California. We were up in Palo Alto. I guess that's where Stanford is. It's one of those towns up there. And so we were in San Francisco, and we drove around to some of the sites up there. So I got to see a bit of California, and that was quite an adventure. I spent the summer working in an auto body shop. There was a shop just down the corner, so I walked in and asked if I could, do something, and they did. So the guy hired me. His name is almost coming back, but so we came back, did my junior year at West Denver High School, and Dad let me drive the car back and forth to school. And then he got an offer to be a chemistry teacher at Beverly Hills High School. And so we moved back to California during the summer of 57 and wound up living in Panorama City. He bought a house up there, and I wound up in going to Van Nuys High School. And I got a job selling shoes at a Kinney shoe store on Van Nuys Boulevard. So, you know, my senior year at Van Nuys was notable only in that I met a lovely young lady, and we dated and seemed to get along really good, very well. And her name was Lucky, and so, you know, that was looking good. But when I got to the point of facing graduation, and I had finished high school, which for me was one of my goals, I guess. And I always had a sense that I wanted to get as much education as I could because it seemed to me that was pretty useful. So here I am faced with graduation, have absolutely no idea what I'm going to do with my life. No idea what I want to be. One of the things that kind of came into my mind when I became part of the Lynch family was, wow, I bet this guy can tell me what I probably should be looking at for my future, and what I have skills to do, and things like that. Never gave me a clue if he had any idea. He's always said, "Oh, you'll figure it out." Oh, well, that's a lot of help. Thank you. So anyway, my solution was, all right, I need some time to think about this. Maybe some time in the service would help me sort it out. So I joined the service. At that point, they sent me to Lackland, and then decided because of the testing that I had language skills. So they sent me to the Presidio of Monterey Defense Language Institute, and I spent the next nine or 10 months learning enough Russian to do the military job they wanted to do. And then they sent me to Trabzon, Turkey. And Trabzon is just a little town on the Black Sea coast. It's the last one going east. A very historical little spot. It was a big transfer point when the silk trade was going on out there, and they would bring things in from the east, and they'd transfer them from camels, I guess, to ships, and then take it on down to wherever. So it was a big deal in those days, and not much when I was there, but you could tell it'd been around for a while. It was very interesting for a kid just out of high school. Quite an adventure. Not only going to the language school, that was interesting in itself, but this very historical place way out in the middle of a foreign country like I had never even imagined. And so every chance I got, I would get out and run around, see what I could see, and they had old Roman ruins there and Greek ruins, and so I got interested in photography. And I thought, I ought to be taking some pictures out there. So I bought a camera from a German contractor that was on the base. And I started taking pictures. And they had a darkroom on the base. So I started using the darkroom and wound up staffing the darkroom for a while. And so got into photography, pretty seriously at that point. The base had a nice big barracks for the enlisted people, about 3 stories, and I don't know how many units, but a big one. And had a library, and had a snack bar for enlisted people, and a big NCO club, and a big mess hall, and a supply area, some big buildings out there where the contractors work mostly. And then, of course, the officer quarters and the officer club. And then an operations area. And this is on top of a hill overlooking the town and overlooking the ocean. And so the point of being there, of course, was to figure out what the Russians were doing over there. And they were busy building rockets. And so they were testing their intercontinental ballistic missiles at a place called Tiratam. It was almost due north from where we were. So that's what we spent our time doing. I was a language specialist, voice intercept operator. And that basically involves sitting at a radio set, headsets on, and tuning around and finding frequencies where Russian activity was going on, and figuring out if it was military or not, and that kind of stuff. And if it was military, what were they doing? Most of the time it was just comm checks. But occasionally they'd come up and they'd get really, really, really busy, and we'd think, oh, wow, they're doing something over there. So we'd record everything we could. And one event was notable that they actually, while I was there, they completed a successful launch from Tiratam to the Kamchatka Peninsula, so proving that they had a true intercontinental ballistic missile. So that was about, well, there was one other exciting event there that's worth noting. We're at the ops one afternoon, I guess evening, kind of early evening, and here we see these pop, 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 bing, 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 bing noises, and there's holes thrown up in our wall, and everybody hits the deck, of course, but we had no idea what's going on. And a few more pops and things, and a while later security came in and said, okay, everything's fine, go back to work. So we find out later that a Turkish civilian came back up to his place in the hills from town and happened to come up a little too close to the base. And the base security was Turkish National Guard. So these are young kids, 17, 18, 19-year-old. And they told the guy to stop, and he said, no way. And so he opened up on them, and they opened up on him. I don't know if they killed him or not. I don't think so. But the Turks out there were pretty independent guys. And, you didn't mess around with those folks. And so it was quite an experience. My military experience was all very positive. It was, for my age, it was a huge adventure, and I got to do things and see things that I certainly never would have considered on my own. And then after, well, let's see, I guess I was at Trebizond for 9 or 10 months at least.
Tell me about your exit from Trebizond.
Yeah, I was just getting there, as a matter of fact.
Okay.
And this is kind of funny because just recently there was an event in the news about an airplane that went over the edge at Trebizond Airport. Well, my departure from that airport, although much smaller and more primitive than the one they showed on the news, they took us down to the airstrip in a truck as usual, and we were sitting there waiting, and there's a little shack, literally a shack. Could have been more than an 8x8, something or other, with a radio in it, and that's all there was there. And so we can hear the chatter on the radio, and the operator says, "Oh, they just left Samsun. Samsun's the next city up the coast." And so that's probably a 15-20 minute trip to get to Trebizond from there by plane. So we're sitting there, and it's like a half an hour, and we're sitting there, and there's no chatter on the box, Well, there's a big squall, big storm out over the Black Sea, and it's about 5 miles off the coast, so it's not affecting us, but we can see it out there, and it's one of those black ones. So it's a pretty good storm. And we're thinking, wow, did that guy get into that storm and things go haywire? So all of a sudden, this little 2-engine turbojet plane comes out of this storm, headed right towards the cliff that the airport's on, and he's about maybe 100 feet off the water, and just coming like you know, like a bat out of hell, and right at this cliff. And we're looking at this and we're thinking, oh no, geez, wow, what's going to happen? He, if this is the cliff, he came in and he just pulled this airplane up like this, pulled it around, landed on one wheel, hit the reverse, and stopped right in front of the shack. It was just amazing. So the Turkish commercial airlines at that time were rotating military pilots through the airline's side. No other way to explain what that guy did. So we all got on the plane, and not a sound in that plane. Everybody that was on there was just sitting there like this. So we took off. We're going to Ankara, and we're coming in on approach in Ankara. And I'm sitting on the left side by the window, and all of a sudden the pilot just yanked this thing off into a right bank. And I'm looking out this window as I go around, and there's a big 707 going right past us, like not more than 50 yards. And he pulls it around and lands it, and everything was cool. So I came home on a leave for that, and then I went back to Brindisi. They cut orders for me to go to Brindisi, Italy. And it's a very new facility for security service. But they had everything there. It had all been, constructed and all that, and it was on an old Italian POW site. So we still had barbed wire all the way around this base. And, like the base in Turkey, it had a nice big barracks for enlisted, and a nice chow hall. This one had a theater. So it had, the base had those kind of amenities. And so I wound up learning how to run a projector in the theater. And so I was a theater projector operator for a while there. And it was kind of mundane, not much going on, They decided they wanted to be there because the Russians were doing things in Albania. And they were apparently very nervous about that, so they decided they wanted to have an ear up for whatever they were doing in Albania. But it wasn't much. As far as we could tell, they were basically just training about Albanian military and stuff like that, but may have had some bearing on what the Serbians decided to do a few years after that, but that wasn't apparent at the time. But so anyway, not anything from a military standpoint that was very interesting. So one of the things that I did wind up doing, actually wound up in Trabzon, is I wound up as an analyst. I called it an analyst, but all it really amounted to was going through all the daily transcripts from the voice operators. And what the voice operators did is, of course, they listened to the traffic, but they also typed, and they recorded. Okay. And so we got these typed transcripts, and then we, the analysts, had to go through and look for stuff that looked significant, or is this part of some operation, or what are they doing, kind of thing. And then we would excerpt the stuff that was interesting and compile it, and then send it back to Fort George Meade, which was the center of the intelligence, comm intelligence, where everything came back into Fort George Meade. So I was able, while I was there, to do some traveling. I went to Greece for, I guess, a week. Had a great time in Athens. I had been listening to Greek music on the radio in Brindisi, and I developed a real liking for that. So I was able to get to a couple of places in Athens where there was some really authentic Greek music, and I did this. I did the museums. I was in a hotel that was about a block from the Acropolis, and so I was able to spend some time there. Getting there was kind of interesting. I went over on the ferry from Brindisi because it was a port, ferry port, and a railroad terminus, because all the tourists from Europe would take this train down to Brindisi and then transfer to the ferries there. And so you take it over to a town that I can't remember right now, and you get off there and you get a train that takes you into Athens. So the train arrives in Athens about dark. And you get off the train and it's just a platform out in the middle of nowhere. Nothing around there. I'm thinking, what? How can that be a terminal for Athens, for a big town? I was just kind of freaked. But there were a bunch of taxis there, and people were getting in the taxis, and so I got in a taxi. And I had gotten the name of a hotel from somebody. They recommended it. So I gave this guy the hotel, and away we go. And it's getting dark and dark and dark, and there's no lights. There's no lights anywhere. And I'm thinking, okay, what am I into now? And all of a sudden he stops, jumps out, grabs my suitcase or whatever I had, and he takes off. And I'm thinking, oh crap. So I get out, wondering, okay, where did this guy go? And all of a sudden this door opens up in the middle of this black place. And he goes in. And so I get over there and I go in, and there's a hotel lobby. And I check in, and they still have blackout curtains on the windows from, I guess, the war. So I'm thinking, well, now that was really weird. That was so weird, I couldn't believe it. But here I am. I get up in the morning, I look out the window, and here's the Acropolis sitting right here. I'm thinking, whoa, how cool can this get? So anyway, I had fun running around. At that age, I could walk anywhere. I walked everywhere. So I walked all over Athens. And I didn't take any of the boat trips. That's the only thing I really regret not doing while I was there. I didn't take any of the boat trips that you can take there, but I did take some bus tours. So I did visit several of the archaeological sites that are there and they're notable. So I had a good time in Athens. And, being on my own was never a problem for me. I could travel by myself. It was usually a lot easier traveling by myself. And generally, I met people that were really friendly and very helpful, and So when I was in Brindisi, I decided to go to Rome a couple of times with a group, and that was just, I couldn't believe it. I'd heard stories about the way GIs behave. It was really worse. And I thought, really? Really? I mean, you guys are at least as old as I am, and some of you are older, and you're behaving like this? Wow, that was just... So I guess I was kind of a prude for my age, or something. So anyway, the rest of the time I just traveled by myself. Well, one other guy, I made friends with one of the guys that were on the base there, and he was a kid from Boston, Tom Ireland, and he could speak Italian. So the base security, even though he wasn't a military police, base security had him working undercover operations for them in Brindisi. Whenever they thought there was a suspicious person running around town, they would send him down and try to figure out who that was. So anyway, Tom and I kind of got to be friends, and I guess we were a couple of loners or something. So we went to Naples and had a really nice time in Naples, and went out to Capri and had a really nice lunch on Capri and did a little sightseeing out there. And we got back to Naples that evening, and we wound up at the USO, and Louis Armstrong was performing that night. So we got to see Louis Armstrong while we were there. But the rest of the time, free time, I would just cruise around Brindisi. And it was another very historical city, and there was a lot of Roman, stuff that they left there. And there was a big road that the Romans used, one of those brick kind of roads that they built that came into Brindisi, because that's where the troops marched in from wherever, Rome or someplace. And then they got on their boats there to go off to the Middle East when they were doing all their stuff down there. So a lot of history there, some interesting fountains and stuff like that they left around. And these little side streets just fascinated me. They're, the buildings built right up to the street, and it wasn't a street per se because they never drove cars on them, so it was just kind of an alley most of the time. And then these buildings, usually 2 or 3 stories that just lined these streets, and then these little doors that people came and went in. And most of the time there was some elderly woman sitting on a chair outside a door, an elderly man, and so it was just a fun place. They didn't let the tourists off the train into the city, so we never had the influx of people from Europe running around town. They went right directly from the train to the ferry, and so the streets were always full of people, but they were Italians. They were citizens of Brindisi who just get out in the afternoon and evening and walk. And so they walk all over the place every night. So there was always people in the streets. So we'd go down, and we'd sit and we'd have coffee. And some guy from, I think it was from Boston, an Italian, came back to Brindisi and opened his own little pizza shop. Because they didn't do pizza in Italy. So he knew there was a base there and Americans eat pizza.
In about 1962, you left Italy and the Air Force.
I did. There was no armed conflicts going on in the world, if you can believe that, at least that they would admit. Of course, there's stuff going on in Laos at the time, but security service was not widespread. There were only 4 bases that I know of at that time. And the one in Germany, of course, had a waiting list 5 years long. Fort George Meade was 10 years. So there weren't really any prospects for me to go anywhere else. There was another one besides the one in Turkey and Italy in northern Japan. And that didn't appeal to me very much for some reason. I don't know why. So I said, okay, they weren't talking to me about re-upping, and my commander might have, he was a captain, he might have said something in passing, but he wasn't really pushing me for anything. So I said, okay, they just didn't need more people at that point in security service or anywhere else. So I thought, all right, well, I've had 4 years to figure it out. I don't have a clue. I don't have any idea what I really, could be doing in the world. And I didn't see, well, let me back up a second. For the musical experience that I had when I was in high school, and as much as I enjoyed it, I never saw that as a career. I knew some guys who were working musicians in high school. They were working gigs and doing the night stuff and all that. And I just thought, that just didn't appeal to me at all. I don't know. Can't really say why, but I knew that wasn't for me. And I really wasn't aware of the music industry per se, the Hollywood industry or the national industry or whoever else was the industry at the time. And the only other thing I knew about it was, well, you could be a teacher like Mr. Eland. And I thought, okay, he's a nice guy, and what he does is really lovely, but I didn't feel like that was for me. So I felt the same way about the Russian stuff, the language stuff. I thought, well, it's been interesting, but am I really interested in doing more of this? And again, I had no sense at all of what kind of openings or what kind of things you could do with language. I knew about interpreters, I knew about the UN and things like that, but I certainly didn't have that level of skill. And the military was only interested in teaching military stuff that you could do what they wanted you to do. So that was not a draw for me. In hindsight, I'm thinking, well, you dummy, why didn't you go back to school and get some more and do something in the State Department or something like that? But anyway, just wasn't in the cards. So then I went back to California. No, I got to tell you this.
Okay.
Got to tell you this. On the way back, they send you to Germany, and they have a big processing station there where they ship you back. Okay, and so you have to wait for your flight. So they're telling us, we're not going to get you out of here for at least 10 days. Oh, well, we're just going to sit here for 10 days? Well, we'll give you some leave. All right, give us some leave. So there's maybe 6 guys that have been together since Monterey at our assignments. 6 of us. So, yeah, we're knowing each other pretty well. And they're all hot to go to Stockholm. Oh, we're going to go to Stockholm. We're going to Stockholm. I think, okay, that's okay. But I want to go to Paris. Nobody else want to go to Paris. So I went to Paris, and they went to Stockholm. I had an amazing time in Paris and met a lovely young lady who showed me all over Paris, and we just had a lovely time together, and I saw everything you could possibly want to see in Paris. And so I left Paris, not really very enthusiastically. I was seriously thinking, geez, could I stay here and get a job and do anything here? So anyway, on the train, back to Germany. Get back to Ramstein and walk into the barracks, and there's a room where people hang out, whatever they called it. And here's these guys over here playing cards or something. I don't know what it was. And I walk in. Oh, yeah, how was Stockholm? Da, 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 da. Oh, Jesus, man, we got up there, and there was some kind of convention going on. There was nothing. There was no hotel rooms. There was no place to stay. We thought we could stay to catch a train the next morning and come back at the train station, and they kicked us out of there. So we had to walk the streets until the train station opened. Oh, well, you don't know. You don't want to know about my experience in Paris, but I did pull out a picture and show who I spent my week with in Paris. Oh, well, one of those moments. So anyway, so here I am back and living with the folks in Woodland Hills, going to school and working part-time. And met a fellow whose mother worked at Rocketdyne in Canoga Park. I don't remember if it was Rockwell at that point or who it was. But at any rate, got a job there constructing parts for rocket engines. So I was a metal fabricator, something or other. And so I'd get pieces together and set them up so they could be welded. And not a bad job, you know. And I could work a late shift, so I could go to school and work the late shift. So that was going along pretty well. And then my foster father's sister worked for United Airlines, and so she lived out with us for a short time. And I got to thinking, well, airline work seems like it's, interesting. So why don't I just go put in an app at United, see what happens? She works there, maybe I can get a connection going here. So I did, and while I'm down there, their offices, their reservations office was on Wilshire Boulevard, just off the freeway there. And American Airlines reservations was just on the other side of the freeway. So I thought, I'll just go down and drop an app while I'm down here. Why not? So, I don't know, a week or so later, I get a call from American. You want to work? Yeah, sure. 2 months later, I get a call from United. Sorry, folks. So that's how I wound up working for American Airlines, and I started in reservations. They gave me an opportunity to be in a management understudy program, just a management training thing. So I did that for, I don't know, almost a year, I think. And they let you, they rotate you around through all the jobs in reservations and sales and ticket offices and airport stuff out there. So it was really interesting. You learn a lot and all that. And so I'd finished that up, and I was doing some kind of admin stuff there in the reservations office. And one of the guys that was kind of on my level, I guess, was talking about learning to program. Well, what's that? Program. How do you do that? So he's talking to me about all this hexadecimal stuff. And I think, So he got a job back at the computing center that American Airlines has in New York. Another name that's not come to me right now. Terry something. But at any rate, they had a big computer center there. And this was where they were running their Sabre reservation system. It was the first, real-time reservation system that any airline had come up with. And so when I was in reservations and you did something on the screen, of course you were on the telephone with whoever's calling in, and so you would search for the airplane or the schedule or whatever. And when you were doing that on that terminal is actually talking to you over telephone lines to this computer center back in Terrytown, whatever. So they took us back there on the management understudy thing, and it's just a big room, nothing going on, no flashing lights, no nothing. I think, oh, what's that all about? So I have a bunch of little boxes sitting around, and that was the system that was, maintaining these reservations for the whole American Airlines system. And later on, of course, I figure out that probably every one of these boxes had maybe 256 megabytes on it. Now, of course, that's in my phone. I've got a memory stick that has that much more memory on it. So that's a kind of a fascinating hindsight into how that industry, how that technology got started. And of course, I had that fortune of being in this world while all these amazing things are going on, from 1947 until now, like how's it changed? 10,000 times different than it was then?
At least.
Yeah. And so I've seen all this stuff going on, and I've been part of some of it. So when I got back with the folks in Woodland Hills, by the way, they had two youngsters, two boys, Brian and Denny, and I was actually in Mr. Lynch's biology class when Denny arrived, and he made the announcement to our class. So, and amazingly, having a 13, 14-year-old coming into a family like that, somehow it seemed to work. It didn't bother the kids as far as I can tell, but you never know about that. And it just all seemed to fit. And I just still marvel at that could happen. But I was kind of a quiet kid, I wasn't a rowdy kid, so I didn't rub too many people the wrong way, and fortunately I didn't rub them the wrong way.
Do you stay in touch with them?
Oh yeah, but they're both gone. Larry and Margaret are both gone. Yeah, as a matter of fact, they're right there. Brian and Dennis are, of course, they're still alive. Brian lives up in Washington on
Shaw
Island. There we go, Shaw Island. And her parents, he's married to a woman named Bunny. Her parents bought property on the island. So we're up there, we visit them every now and then when it seems to fit. He had some rough spots in his life, teenage life, college life, but he wound up being a English teacher to students, for second language teaching. Became a professor in this at UCLA. UCLA would contract these people out. So he spent time in China doing a program over there, spent time in Mexico doing a program over there. So somebody at Brisbane University in Australia heard about him, met him or whatever in one of these programs, offered him a job in Brisbane, Australia. So they took it. They went to Australia and lived down there for 8-9 years, I think. Dennis, he was kind of the cool guy. He wound up being a professor at UCLA also in English literature, and he taught English lit and something else, some kind of debate stuff. And he did that at UCLA for a while, then went to Michigan and worked for a university there in Michigan, northern Michigan, and was there for quite a long time. And now he's retired, and he splits his time between Shaw Island and northern Michigan. So, and he married a lady. Oh, he went to John Hopkins back east, and he met his wife at John Hopkins. And she came from a pretty large family. She was one of the oldest. She decided she wasn't interested in children because she'd already raised a family herself, so they don't have any kids. And Brian and Bunny had one boy, Sam, yeah. But interestingly, they had Sam after Dad Lynch died. Mm-hmm. So Dad's only grandkids were mine. So Gregory and Teresa were my youngsters. And we lived in Canoga Park part of the time that I was working at American Airlines. After my reservations experience, I was interviewed for a job at the airport in the accounting department, and I was selected to be a supervisor of some accounting and auditing functions there at the airport. So I did that for 10 years maybe, and I commuted in from Woodland Hills because I had, in the meantime, Canoga Park, because in the meantime, Barbara, my wife, and I, Barbara was a young lady who worked at United Airlines.
Barbara Quint?
Barbara Quint, yeah. And so I met Barbara at the United Airlines office when I was visiting there to do my application. Mm-hmm. And my aunt, Eva, introduced me to her. And, asked her out and all that. And we wound up being married and having two youngsters, Gregory Stewart and Teresa Christine. Gregory arrived in 1969, May, and Teresa arrived in March of 1971. And so we live in Canoga Park. I worked at LAX.
While we're talking about your children, you want to tell me a little bit about each of them?
Oh, yeah, certainly, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course, being a father and being a husband was quite an experience for me. Anyway, so these two youngsters were just, I don't know. I can't imagine any children being more children. It was just a ball. We just had a lot of fun together, and they were happy kids. And Barbara was maybe a little overbearing, but she really, kept tight rein, and so they always knew who the boss was. And we traveled because we're both employees of airlines. So we traveled. My kids were the light of my life.
Exactly.
When they came into my life, just the whole idea of having kids and being a father, and, not having any training, for lack of a better word. I didn't have any idea of what being a father meant. Obviously Larry Lynch was the only role model I could refer to, and I came into that family at a pretty late age. But, you don't know all the stuff that's involved, and so I realize in hindsight how poorly prepared I was to be a husband or a father. But hey, I had a hell of a good time. My kids were wonderful. I just enjoyed seeing them grow up, and, they were two of the cutest kids I'd ever seen in my life, and we had a wonderful life, and we lived in Canoga Park for a while. We lived in Woodland Hills for a while. We had nice homes. They went to nice schools when they did get to go to school. We had a really nice home in Stamford, Connecticut. We were 2 blocks from their elementary school, so they both started elementary school back there. And we had nice neighbors, good neighborhood kids, so they had kids to play with, and we just had a hell of a good time. And they loved to travel. They were seasoned travelers by the time they were 3, so they knew the whole routine when we went to the airport. So, and they always got invited up to the captain's quarters, which I never got invited up to, and they got to see everything up front, and so we had a great time, and the times that we went to some place other than Wisconsin, they were troopers. They just enjoyed traveling and having a good time wherever we went. And then I went back and finished my degree at Cal State LA. And so I spent several nights, several days out of the week commuting from Woodland Hills to LAX to South LA, Cal State, back to Woodland Hills. I don't miss that at all. But I got through it and I finished the degree. I finished in economics. I had tried just about every other general major, and didn't like it for one reason or another. But economics really appealed to me, and it was kind of a general situation. So somehow that made more sense to me, and so I managed to get through enough to reach the point of ready to graduate. And so my final paper. And I wasn't a wonderful student. Never was I a wonderful student. But I managed to get through somehow. So my professor called me, and he says, "I need to talk to you about your paper." And he talked a little bit, and I could see what his problem was. And I said, "Okay, well, here's my story. I just need a degree. I just need a degree so that if there are opportunities in the future and a degree is a part of it, that I don't get passed over. I'm never going to work in the economics field." Oh, okay. So it passed me.
Based on your promise never to work in his field.
Apparently, because it definitely wasn't based on the quality of the work on my paper.
You gotta do what you gotta do.
Yeah, gotta do what you gotta do. So again, I slid through. I just. So that's how I got my degree. So that's also how I got my next job at American Airlines. So I finished that degree, and so I guess I went into my records. I guess I went onto some system, and my name popped up, and there was a job open in the headquarters, American Airlines headquarters in New York, 633 3rd Avenue. And so I went back to the interview just out of curiosity. I thought, experience at the headquarters might be useful. And I wasn't getting really any encouragement in LA because there were a lot of people around that, knew people that I didn't know. So I went back and interviewed in the finance department in New York, and they offered me a job. I accepted. I thought working in this area would probably be, good education, if nothing else. I was designated somehow the controller of the Eastern region. So it was my responsibility, and the Eastern region at that time was basically the Atlantic. So part of my responsibility was to go to London, to our sales office there, and do their budget, because they just didn't have time. They were nice people, but they were so interesting, and they were so sales. But I enjoyed London. I got to see things there and spend some time, and some museum stuff and some restaurant stuff. And I never did like English food, so. But it was interesting, and again, historic. So I always enjoyed the history of places. So, and then we had a couple of stations in the Caribbean. I think we had Aruba and Puerto Rico. And then we bought some more from TWA when TWA went down. So I was sent to these places, and I think it was Santo Domingo and a couple of other of the islands, to train the TWA staff to do the American thing. So I spent time down there doing that. We actually had a corporate meeting in Puerto Rico one time, so we had the whole shebang down there, doing pretty much what we used to do in Fort Worth, so they made a little party out of that. So I decided it's time to go back to California. So put the house up for sale in Connecticut, came back to California, found a house in Cupertino, and then decided, okay, I got that done, so it's a good time to say goodbye. So I departed from American Airlines and moved back to California, Cupertino. My family was in Palo Alto at that point. My dad was the vice principal at Palo Alto High at that point. And then he went over to Gun High School, which is a very elite high school in Palo Alto, as a principal. So they were just up the road, and it took a little while, but we had enough to get by, and I did a little bit of side work, but a neighbor worked at Lockheed. And so we got acquainted, and he thought my background was pretty interesting, and I had finance, so he worked in the IT department at Lockheed. And somehow he got me an interview, and I got selected for a job in the IT department. Well, this little group happened to be a group they put together to manage a software system that the Navy used. And so we had a bunch of Navy contracts, and they insisted that we had to use this software and hardware for their stuff. It used to be a really top secret database system that the Navy had built for them back in the 50s. So this was hot stuff, relational database. Didn't see much of that around. So I'm thinking, okay, I'll learn that, which they sent me to one school, I think. And so I'm working on some projects, one of which was for the finance department. The finance department was building an application to do their own group insurance processing because they were having such a problem with the IT department getting stuff done. So they said, we're going to have our own computer, we're going to do our own stuff, and we have picked a system that uses Model 204. So they bought their own machine, needed some people to manage the software, build the application, build a system. So the guy in finance that was trying to do this was way in over his head. So he was over at my desk like every day. And so we're doing what we can, you know. So one day he comes in and he says, you think he'd be interested in working in finance? Oh, why not? I do finance. I've done that. Why not? So anyway, I went over and interviewed with a guy by the name of Chuck. Chuck. How could I ever forget Chuck? So the guy that was trying to do this, his name was John. And he was a big, tall, skinny guy. He looked like Abe Lincoln. So anyway, we got to be friends. So I went over and I interviewed with Chuck. And Chuck offered me the job, and so I took it. So I went to finance. So I became a senior analyst in finance to support their group insurance application. So we got that job done, and they became their own operation. They never had to touch IT again, and it was working really well. And so then Chuck says, I need somebody to take over payroll, because the guy who was doing payroll was going to retire. So I took over payroll and became a senior analyst in payroll and did that for the remaining time. We went into a big conversion project to convert the payroll system off of the IT COBOL stuff into a relational database. Horrors. IT, of course, fought it tooth and nail every step of the way. But we were converting the payroll system to this relational database. So we're going along there and we're going along, and then they decide to make a task group or something like that out of this effort. And I had been the key analyst working on this project. So they decided they were going to bring in another person out of a contract that shut down to be the lead on this project. And fortunately, she knew something about IT. So, all right, that's the way you guys want to run this, that's the way you got to run it. But I'm not feeling really happy about my prospects at this point. So things with my wife weren't going well. Things were unraveling. Kids were just about out of high school. Things at Lockheed are looking pretty crappy. I'm thinking, I don't know, what are my options here? So when Barbara and I decided to go our separate ways, I decided it's probably a good time for me to look for something else somewhere else. So I had been renting a room in San Francisco and commuting up to some property in the Sierras. I lived bought property up near Nevada City. And I'm looking and I'm looking and I'm looking. And I see an ad for a job at McClellan Air Force Base. Air Force is looking for a programmer in another system called Power Builder. Well, Power Builder was a system that had come into the market maybe a year before this. And it was a system where you build applications for mini computers and microcomputers, what became laptops eventually. And I thought, that might be a good thing to know. So I bought a laptop and I bought a copy of that and I started trying to learn this stuff on my own. And I was doing okay, not really wonderful, but I saw this ad and I sent in a resume, and on my cover letter I said, I know enough Power Builder to do maintenance work. But anyway, they called me in and interviewed me, and lo and behold, I got a job offer. So I walk into the offices there at McClellan Air Force Base, and they're introducing me around, and I'm looking and looking. Well, where's this guy that I talked to when you hired me? The project leader. Oh, he left. Oops. I'm thinking. Okay, you're now the project leader. Had one programmer on this project. Fortunately, he'd spent a few months working on this project for them. He was still learning Power Building. He knew enough to get me going so I could figure out the project and learn enough programming to keep it up. I had been working on the internet and wound up finding the young lady I dated in high school on the internet. And she was in the process of divorce. And we chatted on the internet and by phone, and eventually, we met face to face, and it seemed like there was still some magic there, so we continued to see each other. So I'm deciding I need to sell my property in Nevada City and figure a better place to be for the possibility of other work and things like that. And with the prospect that Lucky and I would be working things out, I decided to move to Oxnard, California, and I did so. And then later, Lucky was able to join me, and we found a home in Ventura, and we lived there for a while. Now we're living in another condo in Ventura, and that's when the latest chapter of my life began, when Lucky and I got back together and decided to share this life that we have, however much of it there is left. And it's been an amazing experience. It's just unbelievable when you really find that person that is the right person, and that's how that's been for both of us. And so we've been having a wonderful time here in Ventura. I actually was able to continue working on this project for a little while after I moved to Oxnard, the Air Force project. And then that shut down, and I turned 65, and all of a sudden I've got money. Some, anyway. And in the meantime, Lucky and I had been able to spend more time together, and she finished up her business. And an organization that she had been with for how many years?
20.
20 years. She was a program director. Yeah, program director. She did a lot of training for them in the social justice world. All kinds of clients. Big name in business. Been an organization from the 20s, 27.
Mm-hmm.
And she gets a call one day from a member of the board who had just been back to New York for a big meeting in New York at their headquarters. And she says, "We're shutting everything down." Just like that. So they shut it down. So she spent the next 6 months shutting everything down for that organization. So here we are. We're no longer committed to employment. So we said, well, why don't we just get married then? So she lived in LA all of her life. She was a LA girl. She loves LA. Da, 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 da. So I'm thinking, I'm not going to go back to LA. I lived there. I don't like LA. I don't like big cities. I'm a country boy. And so I'm in Oxnard. And so she comes to Oxnard and gets kind of acquainted. And we look around and we find a place in Ventura that we both like. And so we decide to rent that. So we did that, and we moved in, and we got married, and we've been in Ventura ever since. And fortunately, she's kind of gotten used to Ventura. I think she likes it here, and she gets back to LA on a regular basis, though, and has former co-workers and organizations that she was involved in who are very interested in her talent and have opportunities there every now and then. So she's able to get back and get in the saddle every now and then and have a fun time with her friends and all that. So it's worked out really well. So, any more questions, ma'am?
Yes. You told me that during this time, when you were in Oxnard or maybe Ventura, that you bought a camera.
Well, that's interesting.
And that kind of changed your focus, if I could say that.
So I had been doing photography all along, to the point that my daughter would warn everybody when we happened to be together, if I have a camera, where she would say, walk behind my dad, he's got his camera. So anyway, I became a nuisance with my camera. But when I got here and I'm looking around, well, what am I going to do? There weren't too many programming options around, so not much like that going on here, and I didn't want to work in LA, and da-da-da-da. So on one of the projects with the Air Force, I think, they had done some video to do some training for one of the systems, and I was kind of at the peripheries. I think I provided some of the material, and I thought, well, that's some cool stuff. I like that. That looks like an interesting thing to do. But of course, at that time, it was all professional gear, professional software, and everything was $100,000. So there was no chance that an individual could really get into that. But I had a 16 millimeter camera, so I knew how to take pictures in a camera. So I decided, all right, I want to learn what I can about videography. So I bought a camera, and then I went out to the beach, and I started taking pictures of the birds and the waves and the clouds and all this stuff. And then I'm thinking, well, the software for video editing had reached a kind of an affordable point. So I bought some software and I started learning that. And I had computers, so that wasn't an issue. And so I started learning that stuff. And I wound up using Adobe Premiere Pro, and I've been using that ever since. And that was about 14 years ago. And so there's an organization here in Ventura called San Buenaventura, something about Community Access something San Buenaventura. CAPS runs the cameras for the city council meetings and the school board meetings at City Hall. So the guy that was doing that said, I'm really tired of doing this. Do you want to do this for a while? Well, why not? I get paid to do it, so sure, I'll do this. So I did that for 3 or 4 years. Yeah, 3 or 4 years. And it was interesting to be able to see what goes on in city council stuff and design review and school board and all those kinds of city meetings. And so I just reached a point where I figured, I've done this enough now. So back around 2003, I think, I'm at a conference in Reno about doing the video in the courts.
The depositions.
Well, depositions, litigations, something else about doing video in the court, doing video depositions for attorneys. And I'm thinking, well, that looks like it might be interesting. So I went to this conference to learn about this. There's a big organization that does this. While I'm up there, I saw the program that Ken Burns put together about World War II. And he promoted a project at the Library of Congress about veterans and veterans' histories. And apparently, a couple of, well, the Library of Congress had a project called the Americana Collection. They were collecting stories from Americans about the experience in, in the 20s and 30s and all that stuff, and in some of the backcountry and these kinds of places. So a couple of congressmen decided that they should have a project for veterans. So they managed to pass something and get funding for the Library of Congress to do this project to collect stories from veterans. So I had helped a friend of mine in Nevada City who was a vet write his biography. He liked to write. He was an author. He'd published several things, and he did his own biography. And he believed that everybody should write their own biography. Everybody should do that.
I agree.
And I call Bill and I say, Bill, we've got to do your veterans history on video. And Bill was just, oh yeah, let's do that. He was game. He was a game guy. He really was. And he was a bluegrass musician, and he played guitar and he sang, and he was a DJ. He ran the local music or radio station bluegrass programs. He had been a Marine in the Pacific. He was a mechanic, so he worked on mostly ground equipment. Had some really fascinating stories. Before that, he'd been a high steel worker. And then after he got out of the Marines, he was a high steel worker before he became a Los Angeles motorcycle officer, which he was for 20 or 30 years, something. So when he retired from that, he moved up to Nevada City, and then he became a neighbor of mine because a woman who owned the home next to me, he met at a square dancing class. And so next thing I know, she has a boyfriend. She was a retired parole officer from Sacramento County, and she had been a TWA flight attendant when they first started. So anyway, just fascinating, lovely people. And so we got together, we did his video, and just went from there. When I met people that were veterans, I just told them about it. If they were interested, we got together and did a video. And I guess I had done about 40 videos or so. And when I moved to Ventura County, I just met people here. I met the Veterans Affairs officer here. He wrote an article about me in the local paper, so I got a few calls from that. I got invited to speak to some veterans groups, so I did that. Got a few people from those. So I was just doing it as it came along. I wasn't making a business out of it, didn't want to make a business out of it. And then I went to a video club in Thousand Oaks several times. And it was a nice little group. And so they wanted people to show some videos. So I took one of my veterans videos up and showed it. And after that, a lady approached me and she says, yeah, I'm with the DAR and we'd like to do a veterans project. If we find veterans who want to do this, would you do the video for us? And wow, there we go. Whew. From there, we've been doing videos together now for how many years? 6?
I haven't been doing it that long, but
Yeah,
a long time.
So anyway, so that's been working now for all those years, and here we are, doing my veterans history video, no less, and it's just such an intriguing experience, I've thought about doing my personal history on video, and I knew that doing my veterans history was going to be part of that, but I just hadn't figured out when I was going to do it. And somehow, I don't know, in the last 6 months or so, I'm thinking, you're getting up there, buddy. You may want to think about sitting down and actually doing this. And then you pop up and say, gee, I want to do your veterans history video. And I say, okay.
I did.
Yeah, so let's do this.
I'm going to circle back around to your military life a little bit.
All right.
And I have some questions about that. What are some of the life lessons you learned from your military service?
Oh, boy. I think, the usual stuff. I guess it made me more mature. I'm generally considered to be kind of a mature kid. And, certainly taught me how to be part of a big organization and take orders and do my job and finish the job and things like that. Certainly I learned stuff about places I went because of them that I wouldn't have gone otherwise, and I really had fun with that. I enjoyed that a lot. I learned Russian, at least some Russian, and I liked that. Language was easy, but fascinating to me. I just was never interested in doing more in language after that. I've never quite figured that out, but I had other stuff on my mind. So I guess that's what I don't know that those are life lessons per se, but I guess those are the things that I would say I got from the military, from my military experience. So.
Are you a member of any veterans organizations?
Never been interested in veterans organizations at all. Go figure, huh? Yeah.
How has your military service impacted your feelings about war and or the military in general?
Well, I guess I've kind of figured war is just part of what human beings do. So I think it's stupid. I think it's the dumbest thing human beings have come up with yet, but we've done it forever, so I guess it's just part of what we are. So I've never really found it necessary to judge war per se, other than being stupid, pointless, mostly harmful to human race, but I guess there's something there that has to be done. I thought the Second World War was the most glorious war that I've ever heard of. The fact that we as Americans were involved in two wars at the same time, and that we won in both of those wars, and that we won with honor, in a sense. Some of the vets that we've talked to tell me that when they went back after the war in the areas where they were deployed and talked to people that were there, that those people were delighted that the Allies were there and that they were beating the Germans and all the rest of that. And one particular poignant story that I was told by the daughter of an Army captain was they went to a village, and when the villagers realized he was a vet who'd been there, they threw a party for him. And she walked around and saw there were some museums, some little museums there, and they had letters on the wall. And some of them said how grateful they were that the Americans came, behaved themselves in a sense, beat the Germans, and went home, and actually helped them rebuild their country. I don't think that's ever happened in the history of this world. But I could be wrong. But to me, that's as honorable as it can get. And I just think from what I know, a little bit that I know about the way the military operated at that time, we had some really extraordinary leaders in the military and in the government that managed to do all that stuff. And, it wasn't easy by any stretch, and they made a lot of mistakes and all that, but we still managed to come out of it. And we did the same in the Pacific, and we did the same thing with the Japanese that we did with the Germans in terms of helping them rebuild their countries. And that just amazes me. And of course, it hasn't happened since, and none of the conflicts we've been in since. Well, they had their reasons, but I just think they were pointless, and we didn't accomplish what we went over there to do, and we didn't because of the politicians. The military did their job in Korea. They did their job in Vietnam. They did their job in the Middle East and Afghanistan, and the military, or the politicians are the ones who kept us from finishing the job there. So that's kind of my take on that. But my military experience was awesome.
So you've shared. What message would you like to leave for future generations who will hear or view this interview?
Get up, suit up, show up, and do your best.
Good advice.
And figure something out. You know, opportunities are going to come. And when they do, you're just going to have to figure out, okay, does this make sense? If it doesn't, fine. Wait for another something. But when you get an opportunity, do what you can to get the most out of it, make the best of it, leave the situation better than you found it if you can. You know, that's the only kind of advice I guess I could give anybody. And you know, wherever that takes you. All of the places I've been and all the things I've done, I never had a clue that that was what was going to happen to me in my life. Absolutely none. But I just went from one point to the next, to the next, to the next, and this is what it's been. And it's been a pretty good ride for the most part. You know, the first 15 years I could pass on that, but yeah, who knows? Who knows? And so I just kind of wrote it off. I wrote off my childhood as, okay, I survived it, but what did I get out of it? Not a whole lot. Okay, I don't have family. My grandmother, when the Lynch family became my official guardians, one of the conditions was that I wouldn't associate with my grandmother. There are reasons for that, but anyway. So there wasn't family that I could kind of say were part of my life that first 15 years. So what I became, of course, because of that is I became pretty independent. I pretty much decided I'd have to make my own decisions and live with them if anything was going to happen in my life. And I didn't trust people very much. I didn't have much use for people, so I was never a socializer. I would make friends, but not lasting friendships, you know, because to me, you know, when people show up on your life, okay, they'll be here for a while and then they'll be gone. That's the way it was for me for the first 15 years. So none of the people I met after that were ever long term. When they came, they came. When they went, and I just moved on. So that's kind of the person I turned out to be because of that first 15 years, which wasn't entirely bad, but, you know, you don't become very, what could I say? You don't fit in very well. And I've never felt like I fit in. Wherever I worked and wherever, you know, even though I got along with people and all that, I really didn't fit in. I didn't socialize with them. I didn't become part of the whatever. So, yeah, I became a loner, and that's how I've been the rest of my life.
I'd like you to share with me some of your personal experiences that you've had or ways that working with the Veterans History Project has changed you or affected you.
Wow. Well, certainly it's given me a lot of insight into veterans, the veterans who talk to us and what their experiences were, and listening to the first person narrative, so to speak. So that's given me a lot of, certainly changed my perspective on the war and on this world, on this country. And I have a sense of satisfaction of being able to produce a pretty decent DVD with a history on it that's unique and, you know, to me, priceless. And to be able to see that those have gone into the archives at the Library of Congress is, yeah, it's a point of pride to me, no question about it. And to me, it's also a give back. You know, I lived a really good life in this period of time. because I was born in this country and the Americans won the wars, and this was the only country that was standing, so to speak, after the war. You know, we had a functioning government and a functioning economy, and all the money in the world came here, and then all of a sudden we have the jobs, and education was affordable and cheap, and so I benefited from all of that just because those guys did what they did in the Germany and Japan. So, you know, they all gave a part of their life. They all did something that the military decided was necessary, whether it made sense or not. And a lot of what the military does doesn't make sense, but it fits into a bigger picture somehow. And I guess that's part of what you learn is no matter what you think about what you're doing or what you're told to do, it's part of a bigger picture, and that if they didn't think it had to happen, then they wouldn't be telling you to do it, because they don't do that, really. They really tell you to do stuff that they think is necessary, and sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. And fortunately, in the Second World War, it came out to our favor.
We're very fortunate.
The other thing that really intrigues me about these guys is so many of them, of course, grew up in America during the Depression. They grew up on farms, many more than are true now. They grew up in factories. They grew up working hard. And when they got in the military, they were there to get a job done. That's all they were there for. When they had to rely on their own resources and their own judgment about things, they just figured something out and then did it. And then, if the military didn't like it after that, But they did it, and they got the job done. And they were more resourceful and more resilient than any other military that existed at the time. And they knew that they should get orders from headquarters, but if they're not getting there from headquarters and somebody's shooting at them, they're going to take care of business, and they did. And at great risk to their own lives, most of the time. So that impresses me. I don't think it's true anymore.
You're going to continue doing these videos with me, aren't you?
I'm certainly planning on it. I'm going to be doing it as long as I can do it, physically or mentally or whatever. So yes, I'm looking forward to it there.
I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah.
So Ed, I want to thank you for your service and for your many years of dedication to the Veterans History Project and helping other veterans share their stories. Thank you.
You're certainly welcome. It's been my pleasure. It's been certainly my pleasure, being able to work with ladies from the DAR and to do do the things that we've been able to do together. It's just been amazing and quite an honor for me. So thank you very much, because you've made a lot of this happen. It wouldn't have happened if you ladies weren't out there doing this, and I know it takes a lot of time and dedication to make this happen. And I hope you'll be able to continue this too, because we're having problems finding ladies to do this.
I know.
Yeah. So hang in there.
I'll do my best.
All right.
I'm glad I tucked you into this.
Yeah, me too. I was ready for it, and I've been thinking about it for a while, so this was just perfect.